Hey guys, welcome to another video, and in this video I'll be walking you through my entire process of turning a blank canvas like this into a nice looking image like this. So if you're interested in seeing how I do this, please stick around to the end of the video. Before we start, don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. So let's get started. Now if you look to the bottom right, I have a reference image, which is just a screenshot of an anime I was watching. Now the advantage of just taking screenshots like this and using them as a reference is that they already have, well, the design of the character, they probably have the pose you're going for and everything. So all you have to focus on is your style, like the style you want to go for in the image. So I did this because I wanted to focus on the style I was going for. I wanted to use this really thick outlines, thick stylized outlines that make it look like anime, but then with the kind of realistic rendering style as well. So right now I'm just starting out with the sketch. I'm trying to figure out the composition, the positioning and all of that. So I'm just laying out everything. Use the guidelines to construct the head, trying to figure out the length of the sword on the, across the page, across the scene, right? And I'm just using simple shapes to determine where the key parts of his figure is, like his shoulders, his palm, and all of that. And if you notice, I'm still using guidelines despite the fact that the pose is already there for me. I'm looking at the pose right in the image there. I'm still using guidelines to make sure I nail the proportions of the hands, the fingers and everything, his shoulders. And I'm still figuring out the composition, just adding more detail on top of the base forms, the basic shapes, adding more detail, adding the eyes, adding some drapery, adding more detail to the katana. This is just basic stuff. Adding more detail to the hands. Now this helps you, doing arts like this just helps you learn multiple things at the same time, because you're aware of when you're looking at the pose, you're aware of the proportions, the anatomy and all of that. So now I'm just sketching in, just trying to get the overall composition and the shape of the monster behind him. So adding in detail gradually. I just zoom out, adding the larger details and then go in and add in more details, because if you start from the smaller details, you might end up with a composition that's quite off. So you have to start with the overall shape, of the head, of the entire body, before you go in and start adding the fangs and other details. And right now I'm starting with the line arts. Now for this piece I wanted to go for this heavy line art style, heavy line arts with variation, so the lines look a bit rough. And then this gives it a really simple anime-ish look. Now why I went for this thick outline is to make it look a bit anime, a bit cartoony, a bit stylized, um, while giving it, while adding some realistic rendering. So it's not just cell shading, there's a bit of airbrushing and all of that. So you see what I'm talking about later on. You can see the way I'm drawing the lines, it's kind of like blocky. It's not, I'm not using a lot of curves. Trying to use like sharp edges. That's just the style I was going for. Now I'm just adding in more detail, making the line outs for the monster. Yeah, and after doing the line arts, I just create another folder for the flats. This isn't actually what I'm going to use to color the image, but it's just this flat layer is only going to serve as a reference for me to pick the base colors from. You see what I'm talking about later on. Just filling in everything. Filling in the colors. And then after I fill in the flats, I create a folder, because this is something that you should do as well. If you have two characters that are overlapping each other, it's always a good idea to put each of the characters in two different folders. So you can see Utah in the front he has his own folder, and the monster at the back has its own folder as well. So after filling in the flats on one layer, I just fill in, the folder that I created for Utah. I just fill that with a color that's really close to black. So it's almost as if I'm painting in the lights. So it's starting from the darkest, and then I'm just painting in whatever I'm painting. Let's say the skin or the shirts. I switch on the flats layer and I pick that color, and I just paint it in on that layer, as like I'm painting in light. So as you can see with the airbrush, I'm just going crazy, painting, without worrying about making selections and all of that, because it's already clipped to a particular layer. This is a very non-destructive way to work, so I recommend you do this as well. You can see I'm just adding in more detail, using the lasso tool to select shapes and painting in the color with the airbrush. And then on anywhere I want to have more, let's say if I paint too much light and I want to add in some more shadow, I just use the transparency. I select the transparency and paint it in. And you can see I'm also using the smudge tool to make it look like soft edges, so it doesn't look like it's cell shading. I'm just smudging the areas, smudging the sharp areas to make it look softer. Again, making selections using the airbrush and then the smudge tool. It's basically the same process. Lasso tool, airbrush, smudge tool. Adding in more detail, just thinking of the areas that are going to catch more lights, and then adding in more paints, adding in more of that color. Remember, if you want to paint in shadow, you can just pick the transparency and and paint that in, and that will like erase the paints you're adding. Now just rendering the face, making selections, painting in more lights, making selections, painting in more lights. And then I'm just adding in some darker areas. Like I said, if you want to paint in shadow, you can just pick the transparency tool, so it's like you're erasing the color you've already added. And of course, adding brighter areas that I know that are going to catch more lights. Just making selections and using the airbrush to paint in more lights. Now I'm rendering the hair. Making selections and using the airbrush. Now I'm rendering the eyes. So you can see what I'm doing. I just switch on the flat layer, I pick whatever color I want to use, and I use that to paint over. And now I'm just adding some highlights to the sword, to the katana. So this is pro tip: if you want to render anything like steel or metal, all you have to do is just add more highlights in the shadow areas and different just random areas, just adding more highlights, like what I did with the katana, with the blade. Makes it look metallic. And right now I just created a layer on soft lights to add a bit of saturation, because I feel like the base colors were a bit dull, so I just add another layer, set it to soft lights, and then pick a more saturated color and then just paint it in. I paint it in towards the lighter areas, so it's as if as the light is hitting the character, as the light is getting more intense on the character, the colors are also getting more saturated. And I also thought that because I wanted to add a blue background, like a blue sky, so I was thinking why not contrast that with a little bounce light. You can see that red bounce light off his shirt, so the red is going to contrast with the blue in the background. And I'm just using, I think I used a watercolor brush to just paint in some whites in the background to give you some texture. And then of course on the saturation, I'm also using the airbrush to add a bit of glow to the sword, to the katana. Right now I'm rendering the forms of the monster using the airbrush. Thinking of the areas that are going to catch more lights. As you can see, I just switched to the flats, selected the color, and then I'm going to use that to paint in. Just painting in the details, just using light to bring out the forms. And also adding more detail by adding more shadows, making some areas darker, making some areas lighter. It's basically the same process. The lasso tool, use the airbrush and the smudge tool. That's it. remember how I started out. I just uh, filled it in with a color that's really close to black, and then I just start painting in the color, the base color of the character where the light is. Still adding color to the fangs, and again on a saturated on a soft light layer, I'm just adding some saturation to adding a bit of color, and then I'm using a screen tone to add a bit of detail on the monster, because the monster has this texture on it, so to indicate that I'm just using the circle screen tone. Now I'm just adding some colorations on Utah's face, adding some reds on his nose, on his knuckles, fingers, ears, yeah. And then now I'm adding in some bounce lights, some ambient lights from the sky, because the sky is blue. Some of that blue light is going to bounce off to the shadow areas of the shirt. And then I created another layer and set it to hard lights, and I'm just adding in more, using the airbrush, adding more detail to the katana to make it look like it's shiny, like it's glossy kind of, and then adding more highlights and ambient occlusions and cast shadows from his hair, ambient occlusions, just adding more detail, just to push the values further, to push the forms, to make it look like it has more depth. And then I'm adding more highlights. Right now I'm adding highlights to his hair. I'm adding highlights to his hair, to his face. Right now, like in between the foreground and the background, I'm just picking a texture brush and adding in some atmospherics, so it's like dust. You can see the dust behind him. It's really subtle, but it has a nice effect of separating the foreground and the background. And then I just use the brush to paint in some rocks on a separate layer. Another layer, I added a blur, a motion blur, to make it look like the rocks are falling. And right now I just decided to add another screen tone layer to add in more detail on his shirt, just to add to the style. And I decided to, if you notice, this wasn't in the original image, but I decided to add his, like a superpower, like he's infusing the katana with some cursed energy. So I created another liners layer. I made the liners for the effects, and then filled it in with the purple color, and reduced the opacity to about 60%, and then created a glue dodge layer and adding some details around it to make it look like it's glowing. And then I added another screen tone layer on his shirts, just adding in some detail. All this is just stylistic choices. I'm just doing some color adjustments, and you know, now of course, make sure to like this video if you liked it. Comment down below what you think about the video. Do you want me to do more walkthrough videos like this or not? Also, don't forget to check out my socials, my Instagram and my Twitter. I'll be putting them down in the description below. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys.